Hey everybody, this is Derek, and this is going to be an introduction to the Maya fundamentals. I'm going to be following along on the notes. This may or may not be the semester that you are here, but it goes along with the content, Maya fundamentals. And some of the things I want to talk about and go over in this is on according to this. Now, I'm going to be following these notes. I'm not going to have them up on the screen all the way, but I'm going to cover these basic ideas. And the first thing is here. When you get started with Maya, you're going to realize that there's just a tremendous amount of information being put onto the screen. The screen is divided up into tiny little sections. I have a link to the in the course notes. I have a link to the interface, and it will help break things down a little bit. Now, regardless of the version you're using, most of these things will be the same. Of course, they're always adding new content, but or removing things. But one of the basic things that we'll be looking at are the menu sets, the menus, status line, the shelf, and this also is covered in the book content as well. And just getting a basic overview of these things is very, very important from the beginning. So I'm going to move this off the screen, but I am referring to that as I move forward in this bit of information. One of the first things that you want to realize is that Maya has menu sets. If you look at this menu line right here, these are your menus, and just below that is a little drop-down box, and this is the menu sets. And if you click on this, you're going to see that there's a different options that you can choose. And when I do this, notice that the content here at the end is changing. And so what's happening is that you can look at Maya like a big package of, like one big package, software package that has lots of sub-packages within it. So if you're into Maya, you can be specifically interested in animation, and the tools that are used for animating are here. If you want to model something in Polygons, the tools for animating or for modeling something with polygonal tools is here. For surfaces, they are here. And what you need to make sure you're doing is when you're a new beginner user, you want to make sure that you are using the correct menu sets. Also, you can change these menu sets. For instance, if I hit F2, I can bring up the animation. If I hit F3, brings up polygons, and so forth. So not all of them bring something up, but you can use at least a few of those F2 buttons. There are other applications for those other buttons later on. One of the things that's important to note, and I'm just going to go through some of these spaces here. The main area where you'll be working is this portion right here, and this is called the Workspace. Now, the Workspace can be divided into multiple camera views. If you look down here at the bottom of the screen, there is a PERSP. That's short for perspective. So what you're actually seeing here is a camera view of the actual world. Sometimes it's easier to have an origin pop up, but basically the origin of the world is where these two black lines cross, and that's the location 0, 0, 0, meaning 0 in X, 0 in Y, and 0 in Z. Down here you can see that Y is the vertical axis up and down, X is the axis right, that kind of crisscross right and left, and Z is the back and forward. So the front of an object would actually be pointing towards the positive Z. The back of the object would be negative Z. The sides of the object would be the X, and then the top and the bottom, if you will, the head and the foot, if it was standing vertical, would be in the Y direction. Now we'll look at these in more detail as we go along. One of the things that you can do, though, is that you can actually look at the world in different points of view, meaning there are cameras hidden out in the world in perfect orthographic view. So if I have my mouse in this workspace and I tap my space bar, it breaks that screen into 4 unique individual camera views. This is the top looking straight down, the Y. This is the perspective camera. This is the front looking straight down, the Z. And this is the side looking straight down, the X. So when we begin to model and manipulate cameras, you will find that it's very helpful to have an orthographic view of all of these areas. But we'll get into that in just a minute. On the left-hand side here, we have what's called the toolbar. And the toolbar makes up some of the common tools that we'll be using. We have selection tools, these top 3. We have translation, rotation, and scale tools. And then we have some other tools that pop up here that help us to have finer control of some of these other tools, or the tool that we've currently selected. In this particular case, this tool was an alignment tool that I had used previously in something I was working on. On the far right side of the screen, we have an area called the attribute editor and what's called the channel box. So up here at the top, this is the channel box, and it has what's called the layer editor. And the layer editor allows us to assign specific objects to layers, and that layer can be toggled, visibility can be toggled on and off. We can use it to set up templates or references so that the objects can't be rendered or selected, but they're still visible in the scene. And so we'll use that in a little bit later. So we have our top section, which we have our menus. We have our menu sets here. We have our new scene and open a project and save a project. We have a lot of different masks that we'll be using to make it so we can or cannot select certain components. And we have some snap functions that we can snap things to the grid or to different points. We'll get to that later. We have rendering tools. And we have this really nice image-based or icon-based area that makes up what's called the shelf. And the shelf are icons that allow us to do shortcuts or tools that are possible up here. So if I'm working in the Polygon menus, sub-menu set, or this menu set here, some of the common tools or actions that I want to use are available in this region. Now, I have added more than what you have because I have my own applications and my own favorite tools, but you can make your own as well. But when I'm working in, say, working with curves or working with surfaces, these are some shortcuts to working in this in my space. Okay. If I have a specific tool that I am working with, say I'm working with the Move tool, I can double click that and the tool settings will pop up here. So here's yet another window that can pop up, and I can close it, and if I double click on it, it will open it back up again. I can pull this out and give myself a little bit more room. I don't always have these open, so I will close these. And I don't always have my channel box open. I can close that if I like. Now, I can access these and bring these open again by using these little icons up at the top. I have one for my toolbox and for my attribute editor. Like this brings up my, if I click on it, brings my attribute. If I click on this, it brings up my toolbox. Notice that looks like a little wrench and some sockets. If I bring up this is the modeling toolkit, and the modeling toolkit we'll talk about later. And we have our channel box. So we have 4 iconic representations of some very important tools that we'll be working with over here, different panels. Now down here is where we would be using animation tools. So this is something we're not going to be working with in this particular class, but it is called the timeline and the range slider. And we have a tool for writing in mel commands, real short mel commands here, and a feedback area where we can get feedback on what's going on in our scene, and a command line, and those kind of things. So those are all tools that you'll become familiar with as we go along. So make sure that you are familiar with those basic things, and a lot of this stuff takes time to check out. Now, this area here in the toolbox, you might hear the term QWERTY, which is Q the Q key, W, E, R, T keys on the on your keyboard. The Q, if I press Q, it will select. It will go and give me a selection for the selection tool. So I will get my selection tool. If I hit W, it brings up the move tool. If I hit E, it brings up the rotation tool. And if I hit R, it brings up the scale tool. And if I hit T, it'll bring up the tool that an option for bringing up another tool of the current tool that I'm using. And Y will be the activate last tool used. And you'll get to that later on. So we have our selection tools, different types of selections, and movement. We also have quick layouts. This is the quick layout section. So if I wanted to quickly move to a very common screen orientation, I can click this and move to my perspective. I can click this to move to my 4 or my quad view. I can click this and it'll bring up other panels. This is my UV editor. I can bring up another panel which will have my hypershade and some of my other components here that I can use to see how things are, my channels are connected. And this is for a quick view for my animation. I have my perspective view and my graph editor. These are things that you don't necessarily need to worry about just yet, but they do exist. This is our outliner and our perspective view, so that's a very handy tool as well to work with. So those are quick selection tools. One other really handy thing as you get comfortable with working within the Maya interface is that you can hit Control and hold down and tap the space bar and eliminate all of these extra things to give yourself more space. It's very important sometimes that you get as much screen space as possible, so you might want to quickly hide those things. I'm going to hit Control Spacebar again to bring them back. Now let me show you one other thing that's really, really important, and that's, let's say I did go to my All View Control Spacebar and I eliminate all those things. You'll notice that if you hold down the spacebar, it will give you all the menus that are hidden on your screen. Now, I guess not the menus that are hidden on your screen necessarily, but it will allow me to notice that we have redundancies here. I have my animation tools, my polygon tools, my surfaces tools, my dynamics tools, and my rendering tools, and my all those kind of things are here. So they're actually available by going here and using this. So I don't have to have necessarily all of those things available. I can also go here and bring up different panels. Say if I wanted to go into general editors and I wanted to bring up my component editor, or if I wanted to bring up my attribute spreadsheet or connection editor or something like that that we'll talk a little bit more about later on. I can do that. Then I go to my tool settings, I can bring that up and it pops up as a flyout. And so that can be very handy for you. And actually, if I go into other regions and I right click, I get other, here's my toolbox. So I'm right clicking up in this region. Oops, I'm going to go back here, click, and then go over here and right click. And here's my toolbox. So I can bring up my toolbox again if I want to do that. And so I can hide it. So there's a lot of different, it depends on where you put your mouse and right click to bring up different components in different regions. So there's a great deal, and I don't have these memorized. I certainly get comfortable with the type of tools that I need, and I know where to go to them. But what's one thing about Maya that makes it nice is that you can go through all these things. Now I'm going to hit Control, tap my space bar, and bring these back again. Another really nice thing is that every single panel, for instance, if I tap my space bar and I bring back, I'm going to go to my quad view, I guess. Here's my quad view. Every single camera view has its own selections. So I can actually show and hide, let's say, the grid. So I can actually hide the grid in this camera view. Or I can show and reveal the grid. I could show only polygon objects or only something else and hide everything else. Okay? So those are fairly interesting things to do. Now, I'm going to bring my tap back into my perspective window, and I'm going to go up to display. And and I'm going to say show, and I'm going to look for cameras. And if I click on that, these objects here, these icons here represent then the cameras that are in my scene. This is the top camera, this is the side camera, this is the front camera. And so those things exist. I go back to display, go back to hide, and I can say hide cameras, and they're gone. And so there's a lot of things that we can do. Now, let's see, I want to... Now, one of the things that's very important is working with some of our, working with things within our world. Moving the camera, getting oriented to the world space. The world space is an X, Y, and Z space. There's three axes units. And so that's something I want to show right now. All right, so when we're working here, there's a screen that is very important to become familiar with, and that is under Window, Settings and Preferences, Preferences. This is a very important screen. From here, we can change a lot of the things that we are doing. So when you're beginning in Maya, one of the things that's very helpful is to have more of a feeling of what is front, back, top, and bottom. So what we have is the view cube. The view cube can be turned on or turned off based on this checkbox. So I can click on show the view cube, and I can say where I want it to be, located. And it's usually in the top right, and I can adjust its size and those kind of things. And so I'm going to hit save here, and I'm going to see my view cube should come up here. I'm going to go back to Windows, Settings and Preferences. I'm going to go back to View Cube, and one of the things I'm also going to do is go to Display, and I'm going to go down to my View, and I'm going to say Axes, View Axes, and say Origin Axes, and I'm going to bring that up. And this also helps. The View Cube is nice, but it doesn't always function properly, and maybe it's going to be there, maybe it isn't. And so this Origin Axis is actually quite helpful. So from here, there are a lot of other settings that I can go to. One of the things that's important under settings is that I can choose the working units that I'm going to be working in. Now, I do 3D printing, and I work in centimeters. I prefer it now that I've been working with it for quite a while. I find it to be easy. It's easy to calculate. But you can choose those things by choosing centimeters or inches, and we can adjust those things here. Another area of things that we want to work with is our undos. If we go down to the undo settings, we can say we want our undos to be on. We want to set a value, the cue size of 50, and that's kind of the default setting so that we don't have to remember infinitely back. We give ourselves 50 steps backwards, and that's a good amount of information. We want to make sure our save actions are on. We're saving all preferences and settings when Maya exits. We're saving all those things. And so we want to make sure that's there. So this area here, settings and preferences, is really important. So I'm going to say save. So now my origin axis is available, and I can kind of always see where I'm at. So Y is up, Z is front, and X is to the side. Okay. One other thing we can do is we can go up to Display and go to Grid and go to this little box. This box represents what's called the Options box, and the Options box gives us the settings for that particular tool that we're trying to use. So if I click on that, we can go in and we can see our options for the grid. Now yours may or may not look like this. I changed some colors, and of course I'm working in centimeters, so I'm working in fairly small increments of scale. But if you wanted to change things, the length and the width is how many units the grid is. By default, it's 12. If I made it 24 and I hit apply, it would increase that to 24 units. Grid lines are the yellow lines, and so I have 5 divisions within my 24. And then I have subdivisions down in between each one of those that subdivide things into smaller and smaller units. Okay, so if I wanted, say, 24 grid units, that would pretty much not give me what I was hoping for. So what I want to do is I'm going to reset settings. I always like to go back when I make a mistake or something. I always want to go back to the settings. So what we have is 12 units, grid lines every 5. So every 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's a line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's a line. And I'm subdividing every 5. What if I subdivided every 10? What would it look like? So I'm taking those units and I'm making smaller and smaller units in between these. So if this was 1, then I need 16, or depending on what it is you're trying to do. When I work with it, I break it up so I have centimeters and millimeters, because I work with millimeters and very small kind of things. And so I go here, I'm hitting reset. So you can work with that if you were doing something specific that you needed. You can adjust the different colors that you want. Say if I wanted that to be a bright red, I could say apply, would change that to be bright red. Now I prefer to try to use colors that stand out from the models that I'm using and those kind of things. So it's up to you what you end up doing. All right, so the grid and the axes are very, very important. Now, one thing I want to do is we want to add some things into the scene, and we want to then start moving the camera around. So if you go up here to the shelf region, remember, is this iconic representation of things, and you select the tab that says Polygons. And if you go there and you click on Polygon Cube, but don't do it yet, we've got to change a setting. Under the Create menu, if you click on Create, and if you go down to Polygons Primitives, there is a checkbox that says Interactive Creation. Now by default it is checked. Now we're going to uncheck it. If you have it checked, it makes for kind of a confusing interactive tool. It's not. I'll demonstrate it for you. You may like it. Polygons, interactive creation is on, and if I said I want to make a cube, I click that, and then I have to click and drag onto the surface, and then click and drag and raise something up. What you then get is a 3D cube with certain specific dimensions that you've dragged and created kind of interactively. Well, I like to work, I'm going to select that and hit delete. I'm going to hit, if that happens, I'm going to toggle my F8 button and I'm going to say delete. Now I'm going to go back to create and I'm going to say Polygon Primitives Interactive Creation off. Now when I go here and I click this button, it's just going to create me a default cube. That default cube is based on, let me go back, create Polygon Primitives Cube Options Box. Remember the Options Box idea? If I go Edit, Reset Settings, Width, Height, Depth, Width divisions, Height divisions, this is the input information that actually is being created or generated to make the cube the way that you want. Now by default, we're just using the 1 to 1 to 1, everything's 1, and I'm going to say apply. When I do that, it's going to create for me a box here in the scene. Notice that this window did not disappear. That's because when you hit the apply button, the window stays open so that I could make another cube if I wanted. Now if I hit, I'm going to select that and delete it. If I hit create, it'll make me a cube and then make the window disappear. That's the only difference. Now I have a cube here in my screen. It is located at the X0, Y0, Z0 axes. That's its location. Notice that the icon for the cube comes up when I choose my move tool. I have the ability to move things like so. I can move it up by dragging it up with my left mouse, clicking and holding. And notice that only the Y attribute is moving. I could actually move it up too by just pointing in. But before we get too far on that, I'm going to show you some basic camera moves. All right? So the way we move the camera is we have to hold down the Alt key, and we have to hold down the left mouse button, and this is called tumbling. So we tumble, the camera rotates around the origin, it rotates around the object. Okay? Hold down Alt and middle mouse, and we can move right or left or up or down. And this is called tracking. Tracking. If we hold down the Alt and the right mouse button, we're going to do what's called dollying. We're going to dolly in and out. Okay? If I also use my scroll wheel inside, I can also move in and towards, so I can dolly in towards the object. The reason it's called dollying is because in the movies, when you roll on a cart, the camera, you roll towards the object on a little dolly. It moves the camera in and out. So left mouse is tumble, middle mouse is track, right mouse or scroll wheel is dolly in and out. So notice you want to keep track of your world, because it could be very confusing to be upside down looking at your world. And notice that the axis is upside down. This is the front, but the top is pointing down. So it's very easy to not realize you are actually disoriented. You're disoriented in the world. So keep track of how things are oriented by your origin or your area down here. Now, if I was to use my selection tool, which would be Q, I can select my cube. And here's something I want you to see. Over in this area, this is my channel box. Your channel box, remember, if you bring up your channel box by clicking on not this one, this brings up the tools. This is your attributes. And so we want to bring up our channel box. The shortcut for that is Control A, and you hit it again, Control A, and it'll bring up your channel box. Just make sure you become familiar with the way it looks and that it has this title up here. All right? Now, we have tools for manipulating and moving objects. I'm going to dolly back a little bit. One quick thing, if you get yourself disoriented, you have no idea where you are in the world, you can go up to your camera window, go to View, and say Default View, and it will move the camera back. Okay? That's Alt Home. So I was just looking at some of these. And so here's some things that we're going to do. I'm going to select my object, and it brings up the channel box, and it gives me the name of my cube. Now I want to always keep things organized, and so I'm going to name the objects that I create. So if I double click in this, I'm going to call this Polycube 1, all capitals. So Polycube 1, just to give it a name, a unique name. Okay, that is information about its translation and its rotation values. We'll get into the details of this in another lecture when we talk about hierarchy and input and output data. I can set its location by adjusting these values. So I can move this object by just typing in a value. If I want to move it 2 units in positive X, which is going to be to the right, I can do so. Notice that it's moving 2 units, 1, 2, from the origin in X. 1, 2. If I wanted to move it in negative 2, it will move it in the negative value. Same with X or Z, positive or negative. And so, depending on those things is what you end up seeing on the screen and where it is. If you wanted to rotate, let's say we wanted to rotate this around Y 45 degrees. It rotates it. Now let me show you, I can select these, and I can select all, highlight them all, and type 0, and it will change them all back. Now one nice thing about this is if I can use what's called the interactive slider. And so what I do is, I select the attribute I want to use, and then I go in and middle mouse back and forth, and notice that it's changing the values as I slide back and forth. If I wanted to go in Y, I could slide up and down, and in Z. Now one of the things I want you to watch out for is looking at things in an orthographic view. One of the things that's misleading, and if I just grab this by grabbing it in the middle, notice how it's changing. Now, notice that if I go forwards, you can see it sliding, but it doesn't change even in the front view. Even though I'm going forward in Z, you can't tell that it's getting bigger or where it is in Z. If I move it in X, and move it towards the camera, essentially, you can't tell in the front view that it's moving. Same way if I move it in Y, you can't tell other than that the grid line goes below it. This is above the grid line and below the grid line. That's the only thing you can really tell any depth on. So you can use these orthographic views in other ways to help you define where your objects are and how they align with one another. Because sometimes it's very difficult, if I go back to my perspective view, to get a feeling for where it is. Now, we also have the ability to move things in other ways as well. I can move it in kind of a diagonal by grabbing these little corner areas. But I prefer to keep things as straight and without any guesswork, really. I like to move things orthographically, this way than this way, because it's very difficult sometimes to figure out how or where something is. See, it doesn't feel like I moved it in Z, but I have. So one of the things you need to do right off the bat is trying to get familiar with your orientation and how things are related to one another and how to move things around. One of the things you can do, however, is you can lock or choose a camera and make a bookmark. Meaning if I liked this particular view, let's say that I liked this view right here, I can go up to my camera, my current window that I'm working on. Each camera has its own unique app settings, and I can go down to bookmarks, and I can say edit bookmarks, and I can say shot 1, and I could say worm's eye view, and I could say close. And so what that means is if I move somewhere else and I decide that the shot that I had earlier is good, or I want to kind of go back to it, I can click on this and it'll take me back to that shot. So using cameras to set up, using your cameras and your bookmarks to set up different shots in your scene can be very, very, very helpful. Alright, that's all I'm going to talk about in this particular video. This is about some Maya fundamentals, and I'll be going over next working with scene elements and a lot of other things all along the way. So I hope this was helpful for getting you started with Maya.